Hello everyone, Mark Williams here again with my next installment of videos about Wi-Fi networking. And today's topic is 802.11k. 802.11k is a standard that is intended to help wireless clients roam faster between access points. And one of the features in 802.11k, is the neighbor report. So when a client is associated to an access point, it can request a list of neighboring access points that it can potentially roam to. The benefits here are twofold. First, the client doesn't have to scan every channel that it supports looking for neighboring APs. The neighbor list will include a list of BSS IDs and channels that those BSS IDs are on, so that the client only has to send out probe or association request to those channels. Saves time. The other benefit is it saves airtime utilization because the client does not have to send out probes on every channel, and neighboring APs on those channels would not have to send back responses. So you reduce your airtime utilization. Where 11K is enabled will of course vary depending on your vendor. Using Cisco here, so support for 11K is enabled at the WLAN level. So here's my Cisco controller, and WLAN ID 1 is enabled for 11K. You find that option under the Advanced tab, and I have to scroll down towards the bottom. Here we have 11K, and the neighbor list option is enabled. That's what's going to give you the list of neighboring APs for an associated client. This option, Assisted Roaming Prediction Optimization, is an attempt to create 802.11k like behavior for clients that are not enabled for 11k. What the controller here will do, if this option is enabled, is ignore probe requests or association requests from clients that the controller thinks should not roam to. So it kind of is a way to have the controller deny roaming to clients that it believes shouldn't be roaming to a suboptimal radio. Neighbor list dual band option is an option so that if you have a client that's dual band capable, 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz, when it associates to a particular radio, say a 5 gigahertz radio, and then asks for a neighbor list, this option will have the controller send back a list of neighboring access points in both bands. Personally, I would leave that one disabled because if I have a client that supports 5 gigahertz, I don't want to send back a list of neighbors in 2.4. I only want to have neighbors in 5 gigahertz, so I leave that one disabled. Okay, so that is where you enable or disable 802.11k on the Cisco controller. So my scenario here is I'm in a building called Suite 400, and I can get a look at the access points in that building. I'm going to focus primarily on the 5 gigahertz, so I'm going to look at 802.11a, N, and AC radios, and I'm going to set up a filter on AP name just called Suite 400. So here I have two access points that are near one another. They're in the same building. And when I look at the access points under monitor, I can get an idea of what APs that are neighbors of a particular AP. So in all the testing that you're going to see later on in this video, I have clients that are associating to this access point, Suite 400 back. If I want to see the details of that access point, it's all the way at the end of the line. Hover over the blue diamond there and select the detail. One of the things you'll see in this view is I have an option for text view or graphical view. I'm going to select text view because it gives you a little bit faster information. It's easier to see. If I scroll down through this list, one of the things that you'll see is RX neighbors information. So this is where I can see what access points this AP sees as close by. In this list is the base radio MAC, and the power level that I see. So this base radio MAC is the one I see at the highest power, minus 71 dBm. This, I expect, is going to be the access point that's in the same building with me. These are in neighboring buildings that I see at a little bit less power, but the one that I see at the highest power, I expect is the one that is going to be in Suite 400. Now I can go back and confirm by looking at my radio list. Yeah, there's that base radio MAC again, so that is the AP that's in the same building with me, and that's what I expect, that this AP should definitely see this one as a neighbor. One thing to keep in mind is that the actual BSSID MAC address that you see over the air will vary slightly from the base radio MAC that you see in this interface. The actual BSSID that you see is the base radio MAC and plus a few bits at the end of the MAC address, because a particular radio may have more than one WLAN associated with it. The way that you could find out for sure what BSSID that you're going to see in the neighbor report is by going to the CLI, and there's a nifty command for this. It's show AP WLAN, and then what radio, 802.11a, and then the name of the access point. So for Suite 400 front access point, I can see that the WLAN 1 is this BSSID. So note that the BSSID is only a few bits different. Here we have 1E7F is the last 2 bytes, and here we have 1E70. So they're close, but they are going to be a little bit different by a few bits. And WLAN 3 is mapped at 7D. I'm not sure what formula Cisco uses to map the BSSID off of the base radio MAC. Some vendors just do it based on the WLAN ID as in binary added to the base radio MAC, but this appears to be a little bit different. Okay, this is the point where we could start looking at some captures, but today I'm not going to do live captures. I'm just going to have, we're going to take a look at some captures I've already done, but I will go over what you want to do to set up your captures in the controller. Again, what you need is an access point in sniffer mode. So I have a couple of access points here that are in sniffer mode, and the way you put an access point in sniffer mode is you go to the AP under the wireless section, and it's under the general tab, and AP mode is set to sniffer. And when AP is in sniffer mode, it can't connect any clients, and clean air functionality is disabled. So to get the access point to actually send capture data to you, that's going to be under the radio settings under 802.11a and then AC. So what you want to look for when you're capturing is that you have to put the sniffer mode AP on the same channel as the APs that you think your clients are going to be connecting to. Now, my AP that I'm playing around with here is Suite 400 back, if you remember from the previous screen. And Suite 400 back is on channel 64, 60. So it's a 40 megahertz wide channel, and 64 and 60. So my sniffer mode AP should be looking for traffic on channel 64. So if I change my filter and say sniffer, and it was sniffer 1, don't pay attention to this. This is not important here where it says the channel that it's on. What you want to look at is under the details and configure that when you say that you're going to sniff with that AP, you set the channel here. and then you put in the IP address that you want the controller to forward the sniffed traffic to. Okay, so now let's take a look at some captures. And the first capture we're going to look at is an association request. This is an association request from a Motorola G4 phone. So we can see that it's decoded as an association request. And what I'm going to show you here is where you see in the association request that the device supports 11K neighbor report. So here we have a wireless LAN management frame, and we're going to scroll down, and where you see if it actually supports 11K is under this tag for RM capabilities, or RM enabled capabilities, and RM capabilities Octet 1 neighbor report. It says that it's enabled. So this is a device that, in theory, supports the 802.11k neighbor report. And I say in theory because, as you're going to see, vendor support for this option varies greatly, and you may see some strange behavior. You have a device that says it supports it, but maybe doesn't quite support it in the way that you would think. And the same is also, the opposite is also true. You'll see sometimes you'll see a device that says that it doesn't support it, but it actually does. So first, the Motorola here, gonna have to take my word for it. This device says that it supports the neighbor report, but it doesn't. A long capture of this device associated to my network revealed that it never actually sent a neighbor request. So even though in the association request it says that the neighbor report is enabled, a long-term capture of the device while it's associated to a WLAN that does support 11K, that device never actually sent a neighbor request. So here we have a device that says it supports it, but it never actually asked for a neighbor request. So let's take a look at another device. How about an iPhone 7? So here I have a raw capture of traffic. It's not filtered looking specifically at the iPhone 7. So I wanted to show you how you can create some display filters for the for Wireshark to kind of weed out the noise so you can find what you're looking for. So the first filter that you could apply is an association request. So the association request would be a filter that looks like this: wlan.fc.type subtype, and you can see that I've already got a couple of them built here. And for an association request, you can have type subtype equal in hex 0x0, and I can apply that filter, and it's going to show me some association requests. Wow, a lot of stuff in black here. Well, what you're looking at here is association requests that I caught over the air from people far away. They're associating to some access point that's not one of mine. So not going to worry about that. Going to come down here and take a look at this guy. So this is an Apple device, and it's trying to associate to my network. And here I'm looking at the association request, and I'll scroll down until I get to the RM enabled capabilities. So the element is there in the association request, but it says that the neighbor report is disabled. Okay, there's a lot of tags here for other things that are enabled in radio management capabilities, but the neighbor report, it says, is disabled. Interesting. So this is an iPhone 7, and there it is. Now, if I want to see the actual neighbor report requests, that filter I can catch with a different filter. So that's going to be under WLAN MGT RM action code. So that filter will catch any radio management action code requests that come over the air. So here's my Apple that just a second ago I said doesn't support the neighbor report, because when you looked at the association request, it said that it didn't support it. Well, here it is. this Apple is sending out a neighbor report. So something that a little bit unexpected. The association request said that it didn't support 11K, but here is an 11K request. So looking at the packet, you see, what am I looking at? It's a WLAN management frame, and it is a neighbor report request. What's it asking for? It's asking for neighbors on the SSID LRCCD. That was the SSID that it had associated to. Let's look at the response. So here's the response. It's a neighbor report response, and in my parameters, I'm getting a list of there's one neighbor, there's the second neighbor, and there's the third neighbor. So this report contains a list of 3 neighbors. Let's take a look at some of the neighbors so that it said it reported back. So first neighbor is 74A02FB81E7F. That should look familiar because that was the access point that I said was nearby the Suite 400 front, and that's the BSS ID of the AP. So we got something that we expected. The neighbor report contains an access point that we know for sure is nearby to the one the client associated to. There was a couple of other neighbors here. These are APs that are actually in adjacent buildings to the one that I'm in, but this is the one that we really expected to see in the neighbor report. Also, what we expect to see in a neighbor report is the channel number that neighboring AP is on. Okay, remember the point is in the neighbor report that we're reducing the amount of time it takes the client to roam by reducing how many probe requests it has to send out, because it knows ahead of time what channels the neighboring APs are on. So this is saying that the neighbor was on channel 36. If I go back to my WLC GUI, I can confirm that AP was on channel number 36, and there it is. Okay, so good. We are getting some behavior that we expected in the neighbor report. We got that the access point, it did report in the neighbor list that we know there's an access point that's nearby, and it was on channel 36. So good news. Next, we'll take a look at a device that says that it supports 11K in its association request, but its behavior is not as good as the iPhone 7. So here's what I have saved here. And this client was a Intel card. It was an integrated Intel 8260 in a Dell laptop. So it's a relatively new card. And this card, vendor spec says that it supported 11K. Now, when I first started doing my testing, I didn't see any 11K requests or support in the association request until I updated the driver. So even if you're looking at vendor specs that say, hey, we support these standards, they may not be supported in the version of the driver that you're running. And I'm only talking a few months difference. The version of the driver that I was running was from March, and it did not support 11K. Updated to the latest driver, and now it's supported. So here's a capture that's already pre-filtered. It only shows these 4 frames. And here's the association request. And in the association request, we'll try to find that RM capabilities. There it is. RM enabled capabilities. It says that the neighbor report is enabled. Good. So here's a neighbor request from that client. It's a neighbor report request. And notice something missing in this neighbor report request. There was something here in the Apple iPhone that wasn't here, that's not here in this one. And I'll give you a hint. It's the SSID. In this neighbor request, this client is not asking for neighbors on the SSID that the device was connected to. It's saying, give me all neighbors. I don't care what SSID they are. And the Cisco AP responds, okay, here's your neighbors. You have two neighbors, and those two neighbors are at BSSID 1E7F and BSSID 1E7D, and they're both on the same channel. Well, let's look at that CLI again. Here's that AP, Suite 400 front, and there's those two BSSIDs, 1E7F and 1E7D. So the Cisco AP responded with the closest neighbor, and it requested with the BSSIDs for both of the WLANs on that AP or on that radio. So the client asked for something, and the AP gave it what it asked for. Is it optimal? Not really. The client should have asked only for neighbors on the SSID that it was connected to. In its neighbor request, it should have said, oh, sorry, wrong packet. It should have asked for here should have specified the SSID name, but it didn't. So here's something that's pretty frustrating that a lot of WLAN people deal with, and that's the vendor implementation of the standards. In this video, you saw 3 different vendors, a Motorola, an Apple, and an Intel. And the Motorola said it supported 11K, but it never actually made any 11K requests. The Apple, in its association request, said it didn't support the neighbor report, but it ultimately did support it. And we have an Intel that says it supported the neighbor request, but it's implemented, in my opinion, pretty poorly because it doesn't include the SSID. So that's a source of frustration, and it's something that you have to be mindful of if you're operating a wireless network with multiple vendors in it, which almost everybody does, especially if you're operating one at a school or university like I do. So I hope that you enjoyed the video. I hope that you learned something. If you did, give it a like. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment on the video or say something to me on Twitter. And hopefully I'll have something out for you next week too.